Do you have a desire for something more in your Christian walk? Do you have a hunger for the deeper things of our God, whose name is Yahweh in Hebrew? Be encouraged, be inspired, be informed as you search out the truth. As it relates to the Christian and Hebrew history of our faith in Jesus, whose name is Yeshua in Hebrew. Dr. Larry J. Pratt and Rabbi Paul Todd will share the scriptures in our Bible that God said are forever and apply to all Christian believers. These scriptures will reveal the constitution and nature of the soon-coming kingdom of Yeshua, when he rules as our king on earth. In Matthew 25, there are 10 virgins who are called the bride of Jesus Christ, and they are righteous. But only 5 have enough oil. And what did Yeshua, Paul, and others intend for Christians to do when they said, "Follow me"? Is this a reference to the bride of Christ? Get your coffee, get comfortable, and hear a right now word of God of how Torah, or God's teaching and instruction, is to be written upon our hearts. This biblical wisdom will illuminate our Christian walk and help us to be the salt and light that is forever and has never changed. Learn the blessing prayers of Yahweh over his bride and our children and our grandchildren for greater blessing, such as protection, healing, revelation, and answers to many questions.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome to Yeshua Sabbath Church here in beautiful North Sparta. So glad to see so many people here. So glad there's so many people online. Welcome. Let's stop the week. It's over. Get rid of it. It's Sabbath. So let us focus on the Shabbat. The Sabbath is a covenant sign between Yahweh and his people. Let us bow for prayer, please. Avenu Melkenu, our Father, our King, we praise your set-apart name, Yahweh. We thank you for your invitation to your Sabbath. You established it in the very beginning of time. You made it for us. We are here at that invitation. May you be pleased with our presence. May you be pleased with and accept our praise, our worship, our reading of your word, and our teaching. We ask all of this always in Yeshua's name. Amen.
The opening reading.
Oh.
From Yeshayahu, Isaiah 58, verses 13 and 14. If you hold back your foot on Shabbat from pursuing your own interests on my set-apart day, if you call Shabbat a delight, Yahweh's set-apart day worth honoring, then honor it by not doing your usual things or pursuing your interests or speaking about them. If you do, you will find delight in Yahweh. I will make you ride on the heights of the land and feed you with the heritage of your ancestor Yaakov, for the mouth of Yahweh has spoken. The shofar blessing. Blessed are you, Yahweh, our Elohim, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by your commandments and calls us to hear the voice of the shofar. Amen.
There are 4 sounds of the shofar. There's the tekiah, the shevarim, the teruah, and the tekiah hagodalah.
Blessing of Messiah. Blessed are you, Yahweh our Elohim, King of the universe, who has given us the way of salvation in Messiah Yeshua. Amen. And the Shema, would you please stand? We are going to do the Shema and the Ve'ahavta.
Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed.
Hear, O
Hear, O
Israel,
Israel,
Yahweh is our Elohim. Yahweh is one. Blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom for all eternity. Kibbutz Galuyot, the ingathering of the exiles, or why we're in ministry. Sound the great shofar for our freedom, and raise a standard to gather our exiles, and gather us from the four corners of the earth. Blessed are you, Yahweh, who gathers the dispersed of his people, Israel.
Pastor Larry has a message.
Because today's Torah portion, we're talking about the calendar. God, Yahweh, reestablishes his calendar with his people. So what Yahweh wants to do with everyone here is establish his calendar for the year, right? And then we have to decide, am I going to go by the Gregorian calendar? Because, you know, we have dates like birthdays, we have 4th of July, Thanksgiving. We have all these dates on the civil calendar that we will honor. But do we honor God's calendar? And I'm saying, as we do this Torah portion today, you'll see that it's extremely, extremely important to obey God's calendar. So all the high holy days, the high Sabbath, are in that handout. All of our services for the year are in that handout. And we've got many special services that we're going to do this year. I remember the first time that Rabbi offered to do a service here, and I sat out there and listened to him. I'm saying, thank you, Yeshua. It's so precious to have a greater understanding of his high holy days. And Rabbi, he brings that to this fellowship, and I'm so thankful for that. Exodus 10. You see the Torah portion there at the top. Now I'm just going to jump right in, verse 1 and 2. Yahweh says, go to Pharaoh, warn him that Yahweh is about to do 3 mighty ends against Egypt. Now, who are these? Okay, when you read that Torah portion there, you think, well, it's because God had to do these signs, these 10 plagues, because of Pharaoh. He wouldn't let the people go, right? That's what we think when we read it. But did you know it's much more than that? Not only did he have to convince Pharaoh to let the people go, he had to convince the people to want to go. Okay? Because they didn't want to go. They were accustomed to their way of life, even though, yeah, they worked hard and they worked from daylight to dark, and they were in slavery and all this, but they still didn't want to go. I'm just telling you, the more you study this, you see that the people didn't want to go. So the plagues were for God's people to convince them to go. And then the first three, God's people experienced them. The first three plagues. Did you know that? That was last week's teaching. So does that mean that the people in this room will experience the first three plagues of the second Exodus? Yes, they will. Okay, well, what about the other seven? We're going to be here when they occur, and we want protection from it like they were protected. But, you know, it's conditional whether you're protected or not. But a lot of people will see God perform these miracles that's going to happen here in the next, I think, 10, 15 years, 20 years, maybe a little longer. But Christianity is going to see these things that God's going to do. He's going to convince, God's going to convince the world to let his people go. But also, he has to convince Christianity to do seventh-day Sabbath. Okay? See, there are conditions on it. Because most Christianity don't want to go. They don't want to do seventh-day Sabbath. They don't want to do the high holy days. They're accustomed to the way things have always been. So anyway, so he's about to do. So these are the last three plagues we're going to talk about. So always be thinking of the parallel for the last days. And I put a little note there about the two witnesses. And you can read that. Verse 3 to 6, and it was read during the Torah portion. Margaret read it about the locust, so thick it will be dark, and they will eat any remaining green thing, including the trees. So it's my job then to take these scriptures and of the first Exodus and tell you to the best of my understanding how it's going to play out in the second Exodus. Could these locusts happen in the second Exodus? And I'm saying I truly believe they will. Did you know in Revelation it mentions locusts, right? Verse 7, Pharaoh's wise men, his servants, tell Pharaoh to let the people go with Moses, for Egypt is lost. So here Yahweh is convincing some of the Egyptians, hey, this God of the Israelites, he is God. He's already showing them. And guess what? Some of them go with Moses. You actually see it in the greatest story ever told in that movie. You know, you see that. Some of them go with Moses. And then in verse 15 it says, the locusts ate everything. And they ate every green thing. And so when I connect Jeremiah, which is the Haftarah, you're going to see the same thing happening in Jeremiah, which is a prophecy for the last days. Verse 9, let us go, Moses saying, let us go and celebrate a festival. What's he talking about here? He's talking about a moed, an appointed time, a special time that God says is special to me. It's special to me, and I want you to do it. And it's called the Passover. And we're going to get into that a little bit, and I'm going to connect it to communion here shortly. Verse 22-23. A thick darkness came over the land of Egypt, so thick you could feel it for 3 days. So thick that if you were standing, you could not sit. Or if you were sitting, you could not stand. How is that possible? Think about that. How did he stop the sunlight? Did God stop the sunlight? But it was light in Goshen. They had light. Why was it dark just in Egypt? And you know, you can read commentary on this. Well, maybe it's just a spiritual darkness. No. He said if you were sitting, you couldn't stand. And if you're standing, you couldn't sit. Has anybody ever seen darkness that dark? I have. Is anybody in here? I want to know. Raise your hand if you've ever seen darkness that dark. I have. I was in a cave one time, deep underground, hundreds of feet. We had ropes, and we went down deep into the earth. And we got to a certain place, and the fella I was with, because he was a spelunker, and he said, Larry, let's turn out the lights. I said, really? He said, yeah, we turned out the lights. I'm telling you, it was so dark. I could not see the hand in front of my face. It was spooky. I'm telling you, it's spooky. Is that about to happen again? Yes. Could this room be so dark that we couldn't stand? Or, well, for us it won't be, right? Because he said we'll have light. So it could be light in this room, but right outside in the world, it could be dark. And I gave you a possibility there, volcanic ash. I don't know. Verse 28. Pharaoh gets angry, and he tells Moses and Aaron to leave, and says that the next time that Pharaoh, that I see you, Moses, that I'm going to kill you. So in a way, Pharaoh picked the last plague, plague number 10. It's called death. And now Exodus 11. That was Exodus 10. Now we're getting to Exodus 11. And several years ago, the Lord taught me about the number 11. It's a special number, just like every number in Hebrew has meaning. They all have meaning. But the Lord was teaching me about the number 11. And the Lord taught me that it has to do with judgment and blessing. Because what happens here in Exodus 11 when there's a plague of death? There's blessing and there's judgment. See? This is, when he taught me about the number 11, he took a year to teach me about just the number 11. It's a special teaching. And I think Rabbi is going to elaborate on that one day. It says, I, Yahweh, shall bring one more plague on Egypt and Pharaoh, and then I'll let you and the people go. Go tell the Israelites to take the wealth of Egypt and request all their silver and gold. This is a transfer of wealth. This was what was promised to Abraham. So is there a last days parallel to this? I think there is. At midnight on Nisan 15, it says, all the firstborn of Egypt's men and animals will die. That's at midnight on Nisan 15. Verse 2, God says, this month, Nisan, the new moon, shall be the first month of the calendar year. It's in the month where the barley is of Eve. And on the 10th day of the first month, take a lamb for each household. So they were to take a lamb, the Israelites were to take a lamb on the 10th of the month, and it just happens to be the day that Yeshua walked into Jerusalem riding a colt, where they put the palm branches down and they began the inspection of Yeshua. Inspect the lamb beginning on the 10th. And he was inspected from the 10th to the 14th, killed on the 14th, okay? So, Yahweh is reestablishing his calendar year. Why did he have to do that? The people of Israel had forgotten God's ways. Yes, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob used to keep this calendar, but they had forgotten it. They had lived in Egypt so many years, they were on the Egyptian calendar. They'd completely forgotten about God's calendar. So he's teaching them his calendar, and he's teaching you his calendar today. We taught on it last year. I've got a handout about God's calendar up there. How many go by it? How many make their plans around that calendar? I'm saying it's critical. It's critical. And as I close here today, hopefully you'll see that. It's critical to make your plans around God's calendar. If we want to be in the second Exodus, like these Israelites in the first Exodus, it is required by Yahweh that we observe his calendar. That's what they had to do. That's what we have to do. What does that God's calendar include? It includes all 7 high Sabbaths, not just Passover. It includes his weekly Sabbath, Shabbat, like today, you're here. And we're to obey these Sabbaths with a circumcised heart. Because, see, they all had to be circumcised. You know, if they weren't already circumcised, they had to circumcise the people, these Egyptians that joined them. If you read your scriptures there, they had to be circumcised before they could go with Moses. Okay? So in the last days, if there's a parallel here, and we're doing Sabbath, say we're circumcised, we've been keeping the high holy days, and we're circumcised. But if Christianity wants to come in and do it, maybe because we planted a seed or something with them, you know, they got to be circumcised. How does that go down? A circumcised heart. They're going to say, I'm going to do your high holy days. I'm going to obey Shabbat. I'm going to quit eating ham, lobster, shrimp. I get it. I've seen the miracles. Hey, I'm going to do it, y'all. I'm going to do it. And I think it's neat because we're planting the seed with family and friends, and they're going to remember. They're going to, it's sad. You know, there are people in the world that don't know about God's ways. Never heard of them, you know. But see, a circumcised heart, he wants a bride without spot or wrinkle, and that includes the fruit of the Spirit. The Jews named this month Nisan. Now, what did God name this month, this first month? Y'all know? He names it the first month. He names all the months by number. How do I know that? What's the number for December? 10, Deca. Do you see that? So it's Deca. It's the 10th month. See? So that's kind of a little clue that it reveals that even the Gregorian calendar pattern and ways this holy calendar. But when they were in Babylon, then they named the months. Nisan, Elul, Tishri, the different names, okay? Exodus 11, verse 5 says, take a perfect lamb or goat without blemish, less than 1 year old. Verse 6, keep it until the 14th and kill it on the afternoon of the 14th. Verse 7, put the blood on your doorpost. Exodus 12, 8 through 12. It says, eat the lamb on the 14th day. Now, when could they eat it? If it's the 14th and they're going to eat the lamb, when could they eat it? Well, they had to kill it. The lambs were killed between 12 and 3. They had to prepare the meat. They had to kill it. Then they had to have the priest bless it, right? To put the blood on the altar. Then they would take it home and they would prepare it and cook it. Okay, and that took a little time. And then they had to eat it before midnight. That was the scriptures there, okay? So I'm trying just to give a little clarity to this because it's a little confusing. And there's a lot of commentary out there about this, okay? So I truly believe, we've figured some of this out. So, eat it on the 14th. That's after sunset. What happens after sunset on the 14th? It becomes unleavened bread. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, a high Sabbath. So you eat the Passover Seder, actually, on the 15th. But the 14th is called the Passover. And actually, all 8 days are called the Passover. Passover began on the 14th, but then it goes on for 8 days, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So really, in a way, when they would say keep the Passover, they're talking about 8 days. They're not just talking about this first day, okay? It says, then I, Yahweh, will kill every firstborn of Egypt at midnight, and I will pass over you. Well, see, this is the same thing that's going to happen in the second Exodus. We have to have a circumcised heart. We have to do Torah. Don't you see it? It's so plain. Verse 14, this day shall be a memorial to celebrate. How long, church? How long are we celebrate this Passover? Forever. The day that Yahweh took you out of Egypt, and for Christianity, it's the day that he took you out of, when you said a sinner's prayer. When I said a sinner's prayer, the only problem with me is I had to say a sinner's prayer 3 or 4 times. You know, the pastor would do some real great sermon, and I'd get all emotional, and I'd go down front crying. I'm telling you, I did this. I think the first one was my daddy when he told a real sad story. I was only about 6, 7 years old. But it was a real sad story, man. I went crying down front and prayed. Lord, forgive me, I'm a sinner. Okay? That young. Okay? But even as an adult, I went down front several times, all emotional, crying, Lord, I repent. I'm going to follow you this time. Did I? Oh, no, I didn't. I did it for a while, and then went back to my old ways. And but one day it stuck, okay? So it's a memorial forever. It's the day that God took you out of the world. And why do you want to be out of the world? Because they're going to die. They're about to die, okay? You don't want to be part of that. So, will you be protected during the second Exodus? It depends. You can be coming to this church here. You can be doing Torah things. But it says, did you eat unleavened bread for 7 days? And you say, well, Larry, we don't have to eat unleavened bread for 7 days. Well, that's not what our Bible says. Our Bible says we're to eat unleavened bread for 7 days. So I'm saying, did you get the leaven out? We're taught to get, in the store, we're taught to get the leaven out. Did you get the leaven out? What's leaven represent? Sin. So if you're still eating leavened bread during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, what are you doing? It's called sin. Are you going to be protected? It depends. Verse 15, eat matzah from day 15 to day 21. Keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days, or be cut off. Die in the wilderness like they did. They died in the wilderness. Even people, listen, people, even people that were keeping some Torah died in the wilderness. Who were they? Miriam, Aaron, and Moses. Even some Torah keepers died in the wilderness. So this is a huge thing to keep Torah. And I just pray that I'm worthy to be protected. I pray that every single person under the sound of my voice in this room or on TV or listening is worthy to be protected. But it has a lot to do with the fruit of the Spirit. Yeshua kicked it up a notch. He said, even your thoughts, God holds accountable. And I remember used to, and I'm thinking, okay, a little bird says, a little bird will go tell him, when I talk bad about him, a little bird will go tell him, and I'm thinking, Lord, what does that mean? But I studied that about even our thoughts, are they important? They are. Verse 17, this is the forever law of Torah. Verse 22, take hyssop, dip it in the blood, put it on the door and the threshold. So does Yeshua or Yahweh do? He's establishing a blood covenant, or actually reestablishing it, because it was first established at the Akedah offering when Abraham took Isaac up on the mount to slay him. And they took the blood of a ram in the bush, okay? So he's reestablishing his blood covenant. And when I get to communion in a few minutes, this is so good. Because, in the church I took communion, the little wafer and the little wine, and I thought, that's a very spiritual thing. But I remember the last time in my church, former church, they were getting ready to do communion. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And there was a reason, and hopefully you'll discover that reason too. Blood on the threshold. It's also an ancient covenant of protection. This is the concept of blood brothers. We protect one another. Yahweh saying, you do my covenant, I'll protect you. I'm going to take you over, cross over. You're going to cross over the Jordan. You're going to cross over into the millennial reign. And it's interesting, I was speaking with a fellow yesterday, just happened to pop by, and now looking back on it, I know it was a God thing. And we talked for 30, 40 minutes, and it's just amazing. And he's a young fella, but he does Torah, and but he loves the Lord. He loves the Lord like a lot of you in here. And I told him, I said, you know, I'm 70 years old. He said, no. I said, yeah, I know you don't think that, but I am. I may not cross over. I may not. Rabbi may not. I said, but you, sir, are a young man. You will cross over. And I prophesied over him. There are young people in this room. You shall cross over into the millennial reign. I said, and you will rule and reign. Some of you in here are younger. You're going to cross over for sure if you do Torah. Verse 48 says, if a Gentile or stranger wants to be circumcised, do Torah, then he can become circumcised and be identical or the same as the native or natural born of Israel. This is in your scripture. So God is saying, you know, if some of you have seen the miracle, some of you Egyptians, and you want to go with Moses, you can, but you got to be circumcised. Exodus 12, verse 49, there shall be one law, Torah, for the Jew and I added, for the Christian. There's not two laws. There can't be. Then he's showing favoritism, and God doesn't do that. There's only one law. He says, and you shall be known as Israel. This one law, if you do it, you're known as Israel. You're not known as a Presbyterian, a Baptist. You're known as Israel. To say that God has a separate last days prophetic fulfillment for the Jews and one for the Christians is so incorrect. Can't you see that? And it goes against Scripture. But there are teachers today that say, well, this Seventh-day Sabbath was just for the Jews. How warped is that? They even profess to teach Jewish things. Okay? So there are a lot of people out there on the net, in the churches, that are enamored or by Jewish things, like in some churches they'll let somebody come in and wear a tallit, or they'll let them blow the shofar, or they'll let them do this or let them do that because it's Jewish. Okay? They're enamored by it. But should you listen to them if they're teaching these Jewish things and they've got prominence in the church? There's a yardstick to tell you whether you listen to them or not. Listen, this is the yardstick. Do I listen to this Torah teacher in the church? Does he honor God's high holy days? Does he honor the seventh-day Sabbath? Yes, he can go to church on Sunday if he likes, but what's he doing on Saturday? If he's not giving honor to Saturday, do not listen to that man. He's a false prophet. He's a false teacher. I'm telling you, he is. It's a form of replacement theology to say this is for the Jews and this is for the Christians. That's replacement theology. And how do I know that? See, Yeshua said in Matthew 5:17-18, not one syllable or vowel is done away in the law. Not one. I didn't come to change the law. I came to give it more clarity. I'm here to give it more clarity, including his body and his blood. That's part of giving Torah more clarity. Exodus 13, verse 2. Yahweh sanctifies the firstborn because I had to kill the firstborn of Egypt. Get the connection here. God did not want to, he hates murder. He didn't want to kill the firstborn of Egypt. He didn't want to do that. But he did. So how does he redeem them, these children that were killed? He sanctifies every firstborn of Israel, all their firstborn, and including animals. verse 3. He says, now remember this day when I took you out. It's the first day of unleavened bread, and eat unleavened bread for 7 days. Verse 6, and celebrate a feast on the 7th day of unleavened bread. These are important dates. That's a high holy day. Verse 15, I, Yahweh, shall kill every firstborn, that's Zabak, slaughter for a sacrifice of Israel. He's saying, I'm going to kill every one of Israel unless you're passed over. He was going to kill everyone in Egypt, okay? But because they kept Torah and were circumcised and agreed to it, he protected them. Now we'll get to the Haftarah, Jeremiah 46, verse 13. So Yahweh speaks a word to Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah 1:5 it says that Jeremiah is a prophet to the Gentiles. Yes, he was speaking to the Jews in Jerusalem in his day who were carried off to Babylon, but he's speaking to Gentiles. So he's speaking in his day, but what's he talking about here? He's talking about the second Exodus. This all relates to the Torah portion that I just did in Exodus. That's why they connect this to that Torah portion. It says, Babylon shall destroy the land of Egypt. He's bringing in a power from the north to destroy the land of Egypt. And I told you last week, I taught on it last week, how I believe in the last days. See, there was no USA in that day when God spoke that word to Jeremiah. But he's talking about the second Exodus, when a world power, Egypt, or a comparable world power, would be destroyed by Babylon. And I mentioned who I thought Babylon might be, and it's pretty obvious to me that the United States is Egypt, not Babylon. Verse 23, an army, it says, more numerous than locusts. So here we're connecting back to locusts, but we're also connecting it to Revelation. Okay, Revelation 9 about locusts. The locusts eat every green thing, including the trees. Now here's how you can connect it to the United States. I'm just saying it's a way to do it. Verse 23, it says they use axes and descend on Egypt like locusts and cut down all the trees. So is Yahweh talking about Egypt in the Middle East? No. How do I know that? The Lord showed me this week. Egypt doesn't have any forest. It's a desert. Who's he talking about? A last days world power that has forest. This is a prophecy. It says, verse 20 to 24 says that an army from the north with axes shall cut down her forest. Jeremiah 46, verse 28. Yahweh says that he is with Israel, a remnant, and that he will make a full end of the nations where Israel was driven. Well, where was Israel driven? That's one thing we teach on Wednesdays from 3 to 5. When the Israelites left the land of Israel in 721, 586, and 70 AD, where did they go? Believe it or not, some of them came to the United States of America, founded our country. So, do you remember the law of Moses? Jesus did. Yeshua told his followers to do everything that was taught from Moses' seat in the synagogues. Malachi 4:4. This is the last days prophecy, and this is and we're in the last days today. Malachi is saying, remember the law of Moses. Well, if the law's been done away, nailed to the cross, or just for the Jews, then why are we to remember the law of Moses? Now, there's a report called Deagle.com. I've had it back there in the back for quite some time. And some people will go on the internet and read up about this report. and say, well, that's just fiction. It's not a real people. It's not a real. It doesn't mean anything. They'll make light of this Deagle report. Does everybody in here know what this report says? Does anybody? Okay, let me ask it this way. Do you know what this report says? Raise your hand if you know. I know. It says the population in this report. See, this is a report given to all government institutions to plan for the future. Financially, a budget. They say by the year, in this report, by the year 2025, and this is going to sound unreal, population of the United States, which is right now at about 324 million, will be 54 million. That's about an 85% reduction in population. I'm telling you, you don't know it, and I've talked about it before, but something's about to happen in the United States. You say, well, this isn't real. I'm going to get to the details of the Deagle report in just a second. The government knows something that Christianity does not know. I'm telling you, the Deagle, I'm telling you, it's an agency of the CIA. They do intelligence briefings for the President of the United States. They gave him information on North Korea's military strategy at his daily briefings. This is a real group, and you say, but this couldn't be true. How could the population, 300, because, when I'm in an airplane or something, I see in all these cities across the United States, all these lights, if you're coming back at night and you see all these lights, how is it possible for the population in the United States to go from 330 million to 54 million? The government knows something Christianity doesn't know. And in the report, they give reasons why this is going to happen. But see, the problem is, Christianity is just going on same old like always. And something big's about to happen. And see, Rabbi and I have been teaching on it for a couple years. And you out here don't believe me. I'm telling you, you don't believe what I just said. Who is listening? Are you doing Torah? I'm telling you, I see some of you doing a little Torah. I'm very observant. I see some of you doing a little Torah. But are you here on the high Sabbath? Are you here on Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles? It's called sevening yourselves. From Passover to Pentecost, it's called sevening yourself. Making an oath every day, a blood covenant every day. You're saying, Yahweh, I will obey your word. So I'm saying, do you respect authority figures? Yahweh is saying that we are to do his Sabbath, period. But most people that I see are not respecting Yahweh. It's called rebellion. You will be cut off. If anybody wants to look at that, it's right there. And this is a little description of the Deagle people there. But 1 Peter 5:8-9 says that the adversary, and they say Satan there, and rabbis taught about it, it's really the adversary. He goes about like a roaring lion. He goes about to prevent you from sevening yourself, from doing what our Bible tells us to do. And how does he do it? It's called the cares of life. I have cares of life. Everyone in here has cares of life. So there's no excuse to let the cares of life keep you from sevening yourself. None. Now I want to go to the last handout here. We might go over just a minute or two. Nisan 13, 14, and 15. The Last Supper is eaten as the first meal of Passover. Nisan 13, 14, and 15. Okay, here's Yeshua. He's been inspected for 4 days. And on Nisan 13, he says, okay, go prepare the lamb for the Passover. I want to have Passover with you. And then he has a meal called the Last Supper. Why is it called the Last Supper? Was this a new thing that day? I'm saying no, it was not. I did a little research on it. It says that the Galilean Jews, not the Jews in Jerusalem, but the Galilean Jews, which Yeshua was one, right, were keeping the Last Supper for quite some time. What is the Last Supper? It's a meal before the fast of the firstborn. What happened the next day? Yeshua becomes the firstborn of the resurrection. And he says, follow me. And he's saying, if you follow me and do what I did, you also will be a firstborn. He's not changing the law. That's the way the law was established in the beginning. He had to change it back then when they did a golden calf. And then he set up a Levitical priesthood. That wasn't God's perfect will. God's perfect will was for the firstborn of Israel to be sevened, to do Torah. So now, because man blew it, he sent his son to say, yes, now through me, what I've done for you, you can be sevened if you'll do what I did. And he becomes the Passover. He on Nisan 14, he died at 3 o'clock after the Last Supper meal. You know how he was betrayed, how all night. And see, when you do the fast of the firstborn, you have a Last Supper meal, and then you fast for 24 hours. Your next meal, the Galileans would do, was the Passover Seder. So communion in 1 Corinthians 11, which I'm about to get to, is all about the firstborn. Who the firstborn is, and who are you? You're the firstborn if you choose to be, okay? So I'm going to fast this year from Nisan 13. We're going to have a Last Supper meal here. And Rabbi came up with some really neat ideas today because that's on Shabbat. So we're going to have a meal here on Shabbat, like around 3 or so, like we normally do. And then at 6, we're going to have a Last Supper meal. It's going to be hors d'oeuvres and some special foods that are special to Jewish people. And we're going to do that as part of our Last Supper. Plus, we're going to do a foot washing because we're remembering what Yeshua did. We're giving honor to what he did. He didn't have to go to that cross, but he did it for me, and he did it for you. So let's honor him and do it. And then on Sunday at 6 o'clock, we're going to have a Passover Seder. Okay? We're going to eat lamb. We're going to have bitter herbs. Okay? And then you have your high Sabbath. That's the 15th, the first day of unleavened bread. So was the Last Supper a Passover meal? It could not have been. There's much commentary on this. And the reason I say that is they didn't kill the lambs till the next day at 3 o'clock, from 12 to 3. Yeshua had a Last Supper meal with them. It was a special meal with his disciples when he talked to them and told them how much he loved them. And then he became the Passover lamb the next day. Okay? And then there's more detail there about how I know that See, you don't eat unleavened bread, which is, the word is azamos. You don't eat unleavened bread until Nisan 15. Before Nisan 15, you can eat leavened bread, but you're commanded to get the leaven out, which is called artos bread. But see, Yeshua is both breads. He's the bread manna came from heaven. He's unleavened bread, the first fruits of the barley harvest, but he's also leavened bread, those with sin. See, not he wasn't, but we are. We're with sin. So if we do what he did, then we're the two loaves waved at Pentecost. We become the first fruits or the firstborn of the wheat harvest. The two loaves with sin. There's so much teaching there and depth there. And the only way to get a good grip on it is to keep coming, keep listening, because it's so good. And that bread's called artos bread. And, this is something I struggled with to understand the difference between the Last Supper and the Passover Seder. I struggled with it for years because I'd read this thing where it says he dipped the bread in the sop. Well, you don't dip a cracker into a liquid. You dip bread. Okay? It's a different bread. So, the Brit Hadashah. Now we get to the New Testament. But it says, then came the day of unleavened bread. Okay, so if you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're saying that, in a way, when you just read it, you think Yeshua ate Passover lamb. That's what you think. But it says, then came the day of unleavened bread. And part of this is the translation. But they're talking about an 8-day event. They're not talking about the Nisan 15 here. Then came the day of unleavened bread. They're talking about an event. And that is azamos. That doesn't start to Nisan 15. That's unleavened bread. When the Passover lamb must be killed on the 14th. And he sent Peter and John, go prepare us a Passover lamb. So what were they to do on the 10th, Nisan 10th? They were to go get a lamb. So they had a lot of work to do, preparing a lamb to get it ready for the Passover. Okay? And that's why Yeshua is telling them, go get a lamb ready. He couldn't tell them at that time that he was going to be the Passover lamb and that he was going back to the way his Father had done it in the beginning, his body, his blood. It says, and when the hour was come, and I want to say that this is a season or an event. The time of unleavened bread had come, not the actual time when they sat down to eat it. It's the beginning of it when he sat down at the table. It's Nisan 13. It's the Rev Passover. And that's when they ate the memorial meal. To them, that was part of Passover in a way. It kind of kicked off Passover. Because he says in verse 16, I will not eat this lamb anymore. He's saying, I cannot eat it. He said, I will eat it in the kingdom. And it says in verse 19, it says, and taking bread, that is artos. I got azamos there. That's artos bread right there. So you can correct that. He says, do this in remembrance of me. The firstborn. He became the firstborn. I want to go down to 1 Corinthians 11. This is famous. You all know it. This is when Paul is telling the Corinthians to do the Passover, the communion. He's saying, this is my body. Do this in remembrance of me. This is my blood. Do this in remembrance of me. So Paul meets with the Corinthians. They're doing a Last Supper. They're doing the fast of the firstborn. This is 26 years later after Yeshua went to the cross when he does this. And so you can continue to read there. But Corinth was a city. Today it's about 50,000, but back then it was a city of about 750,000. It was a major shipping and commercial city 60 miles southwest of Athens. So why did Paul go to Corinth? That's where the Israelites, when they went into exile, that's where a lot of them lived. How many of the 750,000 were exiled Israelites? Probably a bunch of them. They were the lost sheep. Paul stayed there a year and a half. It was written in 57 A.D. And so in Acts 18:21, Paul kept the feast. He says he kept the high Sabbaths. In Acts 26, he kept unleavened bread. In verse 7, he says the first of the Sabbaths, that's the counting of the Omer. There's 7 Sabbaths from Passover to Pentecost. The first of the Sabbaths would have been the first Shabbat of the 7. That's what that means, not the first day of the week. So when we do communion, we're not doing the Passover Seder. You gotta have bitter herbs. You gotta have unleavened bread and the lamb. Yes. So I went over that last part a little fast because I was going over. So, if some of it went like this, it's okay. But you need to study it, It doesn't come easy. Doing Bible things in Bible ways sometimes doesn't come easy because it hasn't been taught to us, We've been doing tradition. I know I did for all these years. I did what my daddy did and my grandfather did. But if time is short and if something's about to happen, and the government even knows about it, and I think they think it's going to happen because of one reason, I think it's going to happen because of another reason, and that God's going to do it. They say immigration, plague. They say plague, Ebola. If you just turn on the news, they're always threatening, this could be unleashed. This could be unleashed on the United States. Power grid failure. They say if the power grid went down, like somebody hacks into it, and you don't have electricity, 90% of the country will die the first year. EMP, power grid failure. I mean, it could happen. We're so comfortable and so used to the way things have always been. So I'm saying don't be in rebellion. Do Torah. And if you do Torah, then the Lord's going to show you something He hasn't shown me. You see? He'll show you something He hasn't shown me. And then when we gather together, we can sharpen each other, you see, to survive this. It's huge. If 9%, you saw it. If that's about to happen and we're not paying attention, please keep Torah. That's my plea. Please keep Torah. All of it. Rabbi? I meant to show the Can I show the prophecy real quick? Can I do the prophecy real quick? This is a prophecy. Rabbi sent me this week.
Stand and be blessed. It's time. I'm sure everyone here wants, and certainly we all need, a blessing. Yivareka ka Yahweh v'ishmareka, Yair Yahweh panavaleka v'kuneka. Yisa Yahweh panavaleka v'yasem laka shalom. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. And Yahweh lift up His countenance upon everybody and give you His shalom. Shabbat shalom, everyone.